Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. Today we're ranking the top 20 regular Ashes of War in Elden Ring, each with a powerful build at rune level 150. Before we jump in, a quick shout out to ExpressVPN, the VPN I use and trust. It's a great way to keep your browsing safer and more private. There's 3 extra months free on a yearly subscription in the description below. First Ash of War at number 20 is Unsheathe, which is great for posture damage and looks really cool too. Each charge hit will do around 30 to 35 poise damage, as well as a good amount of damage in general. This is a reliable and simple Ash of War that can carry you early and late game. This is definitely something I recommend trying too if you're running the Nagakiba, because that extra reach, you can take advantage of that on the charge hits. The extra reach is really nice for the Nagakiba and it hits really hard. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Keen Nagakiba with Unsheathe. Any seal will do because we're using it for buff. So we have the White Mask, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Faith Tear for buffs. Let's jump into stats. And for stats, it's a Dexterity build, which, by the way, there's going to be a whole bunch of builds. I'm going to classify them in the description, which ones you can do with each other, basically without having to respec. And for this one, there is a good amount of Dexterity builds in this video. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade, 75 Dexterity, and 60 Vigor. At number 19, we have Lightning Slash, an okay Ash of War that is mainly great for the added lightning damage you get. This can turn your weapon into a powerful lightning weapon with solid AR. I recommend this for a change up with jump attacks, as the damage you'll be getting is substantial. This could also work against bleed resistant bosses and those with low lightning resistance. An example of that would be Golden Shade right here, who has 0 lightning resistance. Yeah, the added lightning damage will give the Bandit Curve Swords probably around 700 AR, which is pretty substantial. Do the jump attacks, and you're going to build up on successive attacks. You can also boost it with the Lightning Scorpion Charm, Lightning Tear. We're going to go over that now when we go over equipment. Let's jump into equipment here in a second. Apparently I forgot I did that last. Lightning Slash, and that's the Ash of War we're using. Lightning Affinity, 2 Bandit Curve Swords, any seal for buffs, Raptor's Black Feathers, Millicent's Prosthesis, Claw Talisman, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Lightning Scorpion Charm, Lightning Tear, Faith Tear. Let's talk about stats. And for stats, we have 60 Vigor. We have 18 Strength, so you can run the Nagakiba builds too, and even dual wield them if need be. We have 75 Dexterity. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. All around, this can be a powerful lightning build, although it does use the jump attacks a lot, but you can get a lot of damage out of it. At number 18, we have Cragblade. This Ash of War used to be top 10 for me before it received a poise nerf. It is still quite good though, and goes well with the Starfist or Iron Ball. This is because they do good poise damage to begin with, and Cragblade can get you those now harder than ever poise breaks you need to get in some real damage. Between the poise damage and the damage of the Starfish, which is quite good, it makes for a powerful combination build. Keep in mind, by the way, they have a little bit of bleed build up too. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Starfist and Heavy Affinity with Cragblade on it. Any seal for buffs, you can check out the armor set there. Ritual Sword and Shield Talisman, Dagger Talisman, Axe Talisman, Spike Crack Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. So this is the Strength build, so we're going for 65 Strength. We have 60 Vigor, 25 Faith with the Faith Tier. Our base Faith is 15, keep that in mind. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. We have a decent amount of endurance too. This is so you can do all the strength builds as well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to put in the descriptions which ones you can do together. At number 17, we have Stormblade. Stormblade is a really fun Ash of War to use. It scales off of dexterity and weapon level. You can add in Blood Flame Blade if you're going to be hitting with your weapon as well. However, it will not add bleed to your ranged attacks. This used to be the case with certain Ashes of War, but that has since been nerfed. Either way, Stormblade shines and is a powerful and easy to use Ash of War that does good physical damage from a range. This is another one I absolutely recommend trying out. I've had a lot of fun with Stormblade lately. It's a really cool Ash of War to use. You can get this fairly early, and then you can run a weapon with Blood Flame Blade. And if you get up close, you can get the contact on the weapon too and build up some bleed, and also throw in some regular hits too and make it a powerful build. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have a Keen Nagakiba with Stormblade, any seal for buffs, you can check out the armor set there, Millicent's Prosthesis, Ritual Sword and Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Faith Tear. Let's talk about stats for this build. Same thing here, by the way, because we're running another Dexterity build. We have 75 Dexterity with Millicent's Prosthesis, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 25 Endurance, 25 Faith with the Faith Tier. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade to buff this, and we're able to get a good amount of damage out of it. At number 16, we have Square Off and the Glintblades. I've tied these two, and you can even use them together. Square Off does 40 poise damage on the charge hits, and the Glintblades do 10 each for a total of 40. It is possible to do 80 poise damage with one charge hit upon entering a fight if you're able to get all the Glintblades to connect. This is a fun and powerful combination for posture breaking. Actually, so much so that it may be one of the best ways to posture break enemies in the entire game. Combining the two each time giving you around 80 poise damage, or even just starting the fight with that 80 poise damage and then using the charge attacks with Square Off for 40 poise damage each. Definitely something worth trying out if you're looking for a build that focuses on critical hits and posture breaking. Let's jump into equipment for this awesome build and setup. For equipment, we have the Noble Slender Sword and Flame Art Affinity with Square Off. We have a dagger with Glintblade Phalanx on it. We're using any seal for buffs. Knight's Cavalry set altered, I believe just the helm and the chest piece. Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Dagger Talisman, Ritual Swords Talisman, Stone Bark, Cracked Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. And that was a lot to get through. For this, we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength. I threw in Blessing's Boon on this one to give myself a little bit of HP too. We have 75 Faith with the Faith tier, and then we have 25 Mind Endurance and 60 Vigor. At number 15, we have Repeating Thrust. Repeating Thrust could have probably been put a little higher on this list, but there's some other ashes that are like it that I'm more a fan of. The range on Repeating Thrust is good, and it works well as a dex build with Bloodflame Blade as well as in Blood Affinity. All around, this is a reliable and simple to use Ash of War. Now, as far as Repeating Thrust itself, I do like it, but as I mentioned, some Ashes of War like Double Slash, Swords Dance, a couple of the other ones we're going to go over later in the video I just prefer over this, but that being said, you can build up a lot of damage and a lot of bleed with Repeating Thrust. So it's definitely not bad, but it isn't in the top 10 for me. That being said, in a lot of my videos, you've probably seen me use it for good damage, so it is a good Ash of War, it just doesn't crack the top 10 for me. Let's jump into equipment. And we have Repeating Thrust on Akin Nagakiba, any seal for buffs. We're using the White Mask, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander. We have the Thorny tier, the Faith tier. Let's talk about stats for this build. And this is once again a Dexterity build. Again, they'll be in the description below which ones you can use together. We have Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade for our buffs. We have 75 Dexterity, 25 Faith with the Faith tier, 60 Vigor, 23 Mind and Endurance. At number 14, we have Braggart's Roar. Now, I'm not a huge fan of roars. They tend to be slow, and the windups are sometimes a bit too long. That being said, Braggart's Roar is great for big damage. If you want, you can put your weapon in Cold or Blood Affinity to get a status effect multiplier too, as roar attacks can do up to 3 times the amount of buildup. At high levels, Blood Affinity, running it as a blood build will probably be your best bet, but you can still get good strength scaling on the Guts Greatsword. In Cold Affinity, I think it gets something like a B, and then you can get some pretty good build-up as far as the Frost, and then you can hit even harder after the Frost procs because it gives you the debuff for damage. Overall, by all means, not a bad build. It's a powerful build, don't get me wrong. Just sometimes for me, the Roar wind-up, the charge attack, the altered charge attacks that you end up with, sometimes it feels like it takes just a bit too long. Here we got a posture break, that was huge, and we're able to take down the dragon that way. But you can see, even on the first hit, it was over 3,000 damage. Pretty impressive there. In a second, we're going to go over equipment for this one. And for equipment, we have the Guts Greatsword in Heavy Affinity or Cold Affinity with Braggart's Roar, the Highland Axe for the passive, any seal for buffs. We didn't hit 51 poise because we had a lot of weight for this build. Axe Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Roar Medallion, Earthshaker's Favorite +2, Spike Crack Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. And for stats on this one, we have 65 strength. We're two-handing it, so we're practically at 99 strength because of the 1.5 times bonus. We have 60 vigor, 25 mind, 31 endurance. Apparently that wasn't enough, though. We have 25 faith with the faith tier. Yeah, using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, throw in some buffs for massive damage. In number 13, we have Prayerful Strike, an awesome Ash of War for healing and posture damage. This one goes well as a tank build, and you'll be frequently healing back chunks of HP. This is like the melee version of the Blasphemous Blade, although it's not as easy to use because you have a lot more range with the Blasphemous Blade. That being said, it's extremely effective once you get used to it. Make sure you have some defense and 51 poise, and you'll hardly get knocked out of this Ash of War. It has very good hyper armor, by the way. Give this one a try in Sacred or Heavy Affinity for good damage, and again, being able to consistently heal back HP throughout the battle. Something to note here is I use Black Flame's Protection, which does not stack with Flame Grant Me Strength because it's a body buff, but we end up with more defense and we're taking less damage, we're healing consistently, and I think I only had to heal maybe like once or twice throughout this whole battle, but overall, it's going to give you a lot of health each time you use it. Prayerful Strike is very good that way, heals similarly to the Blasphemous Blade. You've probably seen this build a bunch of times pop up around lately or as a whole, and then on my channel as well, and that's because if you're looking for a little bit more of a challenge but you still want the healing from the Blasphemous Blade, then Prayerful Strike is pretty much the perfect alternative. Yeah, I think people that get bored with the Blasphemous Blade have actually shifted to using this. I've had a lot of players tell me that. That's why I mentioned that as well, using it lately, that they've shifted to this, the melee version. They find it more fun, a little bit more challenging than the Blasphemous Blade, and that is true. It is a little more challenging, but you still get the healing too. At the end of the day, it's probably another favorite build for me too. I've used Prayerful Strike a lot. I have a lot of fun with it. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Great Stars and Sacred Affinity with Prayerful Strike, any seal for buffs. We have the Tree Sentinel armor set on, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Shield Talisman, Erdtree's favorite +2, Holy Tier, Fate Tier. Let's talk about stats. You can run this in heavy affinity too for good damage, but for me I went for a faith build. We have 65 faith, we have 60 vigor, 32 endurance, so we can rock the Tree Sentinel set, which is one of the best armor sets in the game for the weight, and then we're using Golden Vow and Black Flames protection. I'm actually glad both in the Discord and in the comments that more people are using Prayerful Strike. I think that's awesome. It's an awesome Ash of War. Next up at number 12, we have Earthshaker, which is a powerful build to begin with, but the follow-up attack, especially when you're using Guts Greatsword, makes it even more powerful. Although at times it is difficult to pull off the entire thing because you can be knocked out of this one fairly easily, it's still a very strong Ash of War, and having the Guts Greatsword, or the bigger Greatsword in the game, I always call it Guts Greatsword, it gives you a follow-up attack that has a lot of range too. Yeah, by the way, also another thing to note, I do have 51 poise here, but if you're able to get to 101 poise, then you probably have a really good chance of not getting knocked out of it. Anyways, back to the build itself. The follow-up attack you're going to use right trigger R2, and it does massive damage, in some cases more damage than the initial action of the Ash of War. By the way, if you've been following to this point, be sure to sub to this channel. You're not going to want to miss out on all the Elden Ring builds we do. I know at times I'm not the most energetic person in the world. I talked about that recently in a community post. It got a little bit personal in that post, but yeah, I've dealt with some health stuff and whatnot, so my energy is not always the best. But overall, I'm here trying to make the best builds I can, and I've been optimizing a lot of them too at rune level 150 with 60 vigor and 51 poise. Yeah, if you noticed, a lot of the builds I do lately can be considered overpowered, but they're not ridiculous in terms of how many buffs you can do, and there's a lot of reliability to them. It's usually 2 buffs to tier and a lot of damage. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have Guts Greatsword and Heavy Affinity with Earthshaker, any seal for buffs. You can check out the armor set there. Ritual Sword and Shield Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Erdtree's favorite +2, Stonebark Crack Tier, Fate Tier. Let's talk about stats. For stats, we have 65 strength. Again, we're pretty much having 99 when we two-hand it because that 1.5 times bonus. 60 vigor, 25 mind, 31 endurance. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me strength for this one. By the way, this also works really well in fire affinity as a strength build too for a lot of damage. At number 11, we have Bloodblade, one of my 2 favorite regular Ashes of War. Bloodblade is really good, as in 64,000 HP vanished on New Game +7 inside of a minute good, as far as the Fire Giant here. The Reduvia may be more popular because you don't lose HP, but being able to put Bloodblade on a weapon of your choice makes it a favorite for me. You can mix in jump attacks if you use an offhand Seppuku sword and continue to send out Bloodblade super fast. This makes a good combination that can add on basically so that you can do jump attacks like your regular jump attack build and then use Bloodblade for some distance, or when you're up close for a lot of bleed build up and some really good consistency in terms of damage. Yeah, this is what I call the dual threat bleed build, where you can actually back off. If you're up close and you're making contact, you get even more bleed build up. It ends up being probably close to 150 bleed per hit, which is insane. But if you back off, you have the range bleed, and then you can use Seppuku in the offhand and still do the jump attacks. If you notice, by the way, we stacked 23,000 something damage before he even phased, so it was pretty much his ankle getting hit like crazy. Good damage from Bloodblade itself. If you use the Shard of Alexander, it'll boost its physical damage, and then a ton of bleed build up too. Now I do take a hit there, but I just continue to attack because he's going to take some time here, and we're getting a lot of bleed build up on him because we're making contact with the Scavenger Curve Sword as well, and the Fire Giant gets another 20,000 damage stacked on him on top of the 23,000. Keep in mind he loses some HP when his leg disappears, or when he takes off his leg. I just said disappeared. But anyways, yeah, 43,000, 44,000 damage with Bloodblade and 2 separate attacks. Pretty incredible. Let's jump into equipment. Yeah, when he loses his leg, he loses like, I don't know, 20% of his HP or something. But anyway, we have 2 Scavenger Curve Swords on a Colt, one with Bloodblade, one with Seppuku, Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tier, Fate Tier. Let's talk about stats. And if you're wondering at 150 why I love the Scavenger Curve Swords, it's because I can invest in basically 1 damage stat. So we have 65 Arcane, we don't have to worry about splitting stats like you would in Blood Affinity. We have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 28 Endurance. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. Speaking of the buffs, Flame Grant Me Strength, Howl, and Blood Boil, they will all boost Bloodblade because it's physical damage, so keep that in mind. At number 10, we have Spinning Slash, which does good with bleed and poise damage too. I actually didn't originally want to put this one inside the top 10 because I don't use it that often, but it's very good for overall damage and getting a posture break or two. This is a very popular choice. A lot of people like Spinning Slash. They'll put it on all sorts of different weapons. For me, I like it on the Nagakiba. There's a highlight in this video if you notice the Nagakiba is making a pretty good appearance because I really like it in Keen Affinity, especially for the extra reach that it has, and because I really like katanas. Yeah, the combination between the Nagakiba and Spinning Slash, it's really good. You get really good AR out of it too, and as you can see there with the posture break, that's huge too. Spinning Slash does have that advantage. It does a decent amount of poise damage too. In a second here, we're going to go over build, equipment, stats, everything you need to know. Let's jump into it. Key Nagakiba with Spinning Slash and Bloodflame Blade. We're using any seal for buffs. White Mask, Blissen's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Fate Tear. Let's talk about stats. Yeah, Godric talks for a while. Anyways, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 25 Endurance. This is going to be another one of those Dexterity builds. 75 Dexterity, 25 Faith with a Faith tier for buffs, Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Bloodflame Blade. At number 9, we have Black Flame Tornado in the shortest clip on here because, well, Gideon. This is a powerful Ash of War that does massive fire and percentage damage. The main problem with it, though, is it has virtually no hyper armor and you can be knocked out of it too easily. That being said, this is an Ash of War that can take on and destroy some of the bigger targets in the game fairly easily because of the fact that it does percentage damage a certain amount of HP, so the more HP, the more damage you get out of it. And keep in mind, the Ash of War scales entirely with your Fate stat. And keep in mind, this one is really fun to use too, so being able to pull this one off definitely feels good. You can get a lot of damage out of it. In a second here, we're going to jump into the build, stats, and everything you need to know. For the build, we have the Grave Scythe in Flame Art Affinity because it's a big weapon we can throw in Flame Art. Any Seal, Tree Sentinel Armor Set, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Erdtree's Favorite +2, Fire Tier, Fate Tier. Let's talk about stats. Yeah, some of these clips I know when I take them I need to slow them down a little bit because that was probably too fast. Anyways, we have 60 Vigor for this one. This is another one of those ones that's going to be with some of the Faith builds on here. We have 75 Faith with the Fate Tier, Golden Vow, and Flame Grant Me Strength. At number 8, we have Flaming Strike, which is a super cool and strong Ash of War. This imbues your weapon with fire, and it does well as both a strength and a faith build. I like running it as a faith build, sometimes with fire incantations too. But since this is an Ash of War video, we'll be using the best part of it. The high AR you get with the Bandit Curve Swords when they're on fire. It adds up to 7 to 750 AR depending on faith, which is crazy for a curve sword. The Ash of War itself is good. The first part scales with strength and the second part AR. Pick this one up if you're looking for a powerful fire build without having to farm for the magma blades or splitting stats. Yeah, this one ends up being really powerful because keep in mind, there's a lot of bosses in the game. I've mentioned this in many of my videos, but there's a lot of bosses in the game with 0 fire resistance, so the amount of fire damage we're doing, combined jump attacks, you can throw in the Ash of War when you have time for it. With Godfrey, it was a little bit difficult, but that being said, it does massive fire damage. Godfrey took a few tries, I'm not going to lie about that. I think it was 3 or 4 in total, but that's not too many on New Game Plus 7. He can be a little bit of a challenge. A lot of players I know struggle with him. He has a difficult moveset, and he does the most physical damage, I believe, of any boss in the game, aside maybe from the Fire Giant when he slams down the shield thing that he carries. But aside from that, I think Godfrey is probably the most physical damage in the game as far as output. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have 2 Bandit Curve Swords and Flame Art Affinity with Flaming Strike. Any seal for buffs, but if you're running it as a Faith build, you can use the Erdtree seal, which is awesome. Raptor's Black Feathers, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Fire Scorpion Charm, Claw Talisman, Thorny Tear, Fire Tear. Let's talk about stats. And if by chance you want to run fire incantations with it, then the Giant Seal is probably the best. We have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 32 Endurance, a decent amount of armor on. We hit well over 51 poise. We have 65 Faith. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a very powerful fire build. At number 7, we have Sword Dance, which, by the way, for me, this one is only slightly behind Double Slash. They're both really good. They're both fairly close in terms of damage and bleed. I know some people like or prefer one over the other. For me, personally, I prefer Double Slash just a little bit more than Sword Dance, but Sword Dance itself is quite good. It's a very good and powerful Ash of War for dexterity builds. Yeah, it's no slouch, and you have the end slam too that you get. You also get that with Double Slash. I think the slam at the end for this one does a little bit more, but that being said, it's a reliable build as well as Double Slash, which will end up being the next one. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment, stats, and everything you need to know for this build. And for the build, we have the Key Nagakiba with Sword Dance on it. We're using any seal for buffs. We have the White Mask, we have Mlissen's Prosthesis, the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Fate Tear. Let's talk about stats. And some more bosses talking in the background. Anyways, we have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 25 Endurance, 75 Dexterity. Another one of the Dexterity builds that you can run. 25 Faith with the Faith Tier. We have Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade for our buffs. In number 6, we have Double Slash, as expected. Double Slash has a long animation, but when you pull it off, it absolutely slaps. It's also flat out better now than the Rivers of Blood after the weapon was nerfed into the ground. I actually did a test on my alt channel. If you want to check out that video, I can link that video in the description, testing the 2 at 150, and the Keen Nagakiba with Double Slash wins every time. Yeah, and of course part of that is having to split stats since I'm capping at 150, but that being said, we did try it at max level or near max level with 80 in all damage stats, and a quality Nagakiba managed to beat the Rivers of Blood. So that being said, Double Slash is now definitely more towards the meta, if there is a meta for PvE, than the Rivers of Blood is after so many nerfs. Double Slash is really powerful. I end up getting hit at the end here by a troll that probably should have never spawned, but as you can see, we go through the animation for 9,706 damage, which is pretty incredible at rune level 150. Overall, Double Slash is reliable and powerful as a dex build. Get some bleed too. In a second here, we're going to go over everything you need to know. And we ended up sitting and waiting here before we jump into equipment stats and everything you need to know, because there's a little bit of an ending after Renala. Let's jump into equipment now. For equipment, we have the Key Nagakiba with Double Slash and Blood Flame Blade, any seal for buffs, White Mask, Mlissen's Prosthesis. We have Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. And this is less confusing because the Faith Tier is not active, so there's my base Faith, which is 15. We're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade. We have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 25 Endurance, 75 Dexterity with Mlissen's Prosthesis, and definitely try out Double Slash on the Key Nagakiba. In number 5, we have Wild Strikes, which is really powerful in heavy affinity and in blood affinity too. Wild Strikes is also super fun to use, and the Rusted Anchor does pierce damage. Radahn ends up vanishing pretty quickly here, and we're able to do a ton of damage after getting hit once or twice. The pierce damage can work with the Spirit Talisman, although for me, it doesn't seem to add enough consistently to use. Try this one out for a fast strength build. All the footage, by the way, is on New Game Plus 7, and once again on New Game Plus 7, Radahn isn't even going to be able to phase because the Rusted Anchor with Wild Strikes does that much damage. We're building up on successive hits. We're doing a lot of damage in general because we're in heavy affinity and it's a big weapon. This is a solid, well-rounded build. Definitely something that you're going to want to try out for strength builds if you're looking for a bit of a change-up. The Wild Strikes Ash of War is really powerful with a lot of different weapons, but it's very good with the Rusted Anchor. Let's jump into equipment. For equipment, we have the Heavy Rusted Anchor with Wild Strikes on it, any seal for buffs. You can check out the armor set there. Ritual Swords Talisman, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Mlissen's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Thorny Tear, Fate Tier. Let's jump into stats. For stats, we have 65 Strength. Once again, when we're two-handing it, it's practically 99 at that point. We have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 31 Endurance. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. Overall, this is a build I recommend trying out. As you can see on Radahn there, it does massive damage. In number 4, we have Royal Knight's Resolve tied with Carian Grandeur. I'm showing the one I like more, which is Royal Knight's Resolve. This is an awesome Ash of War for strength builds, and it also works really well in fire affinity. With just literally 2 buffs and our tier, we're able to do massive damage to this tree avatar. By the way, Carian Grandeur, I can do a build for that if people want to see me do a build for it eventually. I use Royal Knight's Resolve more. They're kind of similar. Carian Grandeur scales purely with intelligence. Let's jump into equipment. And for equipment, we have the Giant Crusher in Fire Affinity. We're using the Golden Vow Ash of War for this one. Any seal for buffs for Flame Grant Me Strength. Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Axe Talisman. We have Erdtree's Favorite +2, Spike, Crack Tier, Fire Tier. Let's talk about stats. By the way, even though it's equipped, we were using the Golden Vow Ash of War instead for this one, and then Flame Grant Me Strength to buff the fire and physical damage. We have 60 Vigor, 25 Mind, 31 Endurance, and we have 99 Strength basically when two-handing, and I'll put this one in the description with the other ones you can try. In number 3, we have Lion's Claw, which I'm going to tie with Giant Hunt because they're relatively similar. Out of the two, I prefer Lion's Claw. I seem to get more poise damage and consistency out of it. Plus, you have pretty much infinite hyper armor when you're in the air, and Lion's Claw is one of the most dependable Ashes of War in Elden Ring. This is really truly an incredible Ash of War. You can start out early in the game with this. I have a Guts Greatsword guide with Lion's Claw for the early game. I guess I can attach that to the description below if you haven't seen that one. But it can carry you in the early game all the way through the mid game to the end game, New Game Plus and beyond, New Game Plus 7, doesn't matter. Lion's Claw is great. And it ended up being pretty much a beatdown of Morgott on New Game Plus 7. Not that even on the max scaling of the game he has a ton of HP. He has decent resistances and pretty mild HP. It's not too bad. Anyways, we're going to jump into equipment for this awesome build. For equipment here, we have Guts Greatsword in Fire Affinity with Lion's Claw, any seal for buffs. You can check out the armor set there. Ritual Sword, Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Earthshaker's Favorite +2, Fire tier, Faith tier. Let's talk about stats. For stats, when we're two-handing it, we have around 99 strength again, getting a lot of damage out of Lion's Claw. We have 60 vigor, 25 mind, 31 endurance, 25 faith with the Faith tier, and then of course we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. At number 2, we have Seppuku, which is probably number 1 for a lot of people. This Ash of War makes your bleed build do an insane amount of build-up and damage at the cost of some HP. This is known as the Jump Attack Bleed build and has been a staple since launch time. Believe it or not, Seppuku saw a nerf after launch, but it's still ridiculously good. This is easy mode for most bosses. I'll mention again why I chose the Scavenger Curve Swords. It's so that I can get to 60 Vigor, have a reasonable amount of Endurance, even a little bit of Mind if I need that too. You can throw in the Dragon Communion Seal, even add some incantations with a build like this one, and then just pump up the Arcane because we only have to worry about really 1 damage stat. And with only Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength, we were able to do 3 jump attacks that were the equivalent of 19,000 damage. I believe we're able to do that again. The Godskin Duo has around 40,000 HP on New Game Plus 7. I think it's around 38,000, so 6 jump attacks and over 38,000 damage. Yeah, a lot of damage with a build like this. We have 2 Scavenger Curve Swords on a Colt with Seppuku. We're using the Dragon Communion Seal, White Mask Raptor's Black Feathers, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Rotwing Sword Insignia, Claw Talisman, Maleficent's Prosthesis, Thorny tier, Fate tier. Let's talk about stats. And this is the same as the Bloodblade one, where we have 65 Arcane, we have 20 Dexterity, you really only need 14, but Maleficent's Prosthesis will give you 5 more. We have 28 Endurance, 23 Mind, 60 Vigor, and we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. At number 1, my favorite Ash of War for both reliability and fun is Ice Spear. Ice Spear is super easy to use, can be spammed, does pure magic damage, and has both dexterity and magic scaling. This is the Keen version on the Guardian Sword Spear I'm showing off first, then we'll go over the magic version. AR is a factor too, so there's a lot going on, but it's really good, and after you proc Frost, you'll continue hitting for significantly more damage. It also does around 20 stance damage on each hit. Yeah, Ice Spear is overall an impressive Ash of War. It adds a lot of versatility as a dexterity build because you're probably going to be using something like Sword Dance or Double Slash, and then you could switch it up to Ice Spear and still get good damage because it does have dexterity scaling and AR scaling too. I think the part that I just end up keep liking this Ash of War more and more and more is the fact that you could easily roll out of it. It's so easy to spam, and each time you're getting like 2,000, 2,500 damage a pop, and you can proc Frost and do stance damage. And I think that's the reason why it's one of my favorite Ashes of War to use. A lot going on. Stance damage, frost damage, dexterity, magic scaling. For this we have the Keen Guardian Sword Spear on this version with Ice Spear, any seal for buff, Spellblade set, Ritual Sword and Shield Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Magic tier, Fate tier. Let's talk about stats. And yeah, it's one of those things where I felt like last week it wasn't far enough up on my overpowered builds where I had it at 10 or 11. I really like this Ash of War. It's really useful, it's versatile, it's incredibly reliable. We have 60 Vigor, 65 Dexterity, 23 Faith because we're using Hal, and we have Golden Vow and Hellish Reburie as our buffs. Now for the magic version, you can add in Terra Magica and get even more damage. This is option 2, although for me I like the versatility of a dex build that can run Double Slash for one boss, then switch to Ice Spear for the next. That being said, Magic Affinity is good too, and they do around the same damage overall. This is an Ash I will continue to use through DLC, as I imagine this will hold up and be quite good when that time arrives. Now, as you already know, resistances are different for pretty much every boss in the game. That being said, if you notice, we're actually getting more damage on Radagon with the Keen Sword Spear as opposed to the magic version. It's kind of cool too, because you don't need to respec. Like, you can switch to basically a Dex or even a Bleed build if you add in Bloodflame Blade, and then switch right back to Ice Spear for any boss that's giving you trouble or Bleed resistant, or if you just want to hang back and have a little bit of an easier time, Ice Spear is fantastic for that. A lot of people always ask me what my favorite builds are. Right now, my current favorite 2 builds are Ice Spear and then Bloodblade. I really like them. They're a lot of fun. They can easily be spammed and do a lot of damage. And for me, it's kept the game interesting. I like the 2, and I like running especially Ice Spear, as I mentioned, as a dexterity build. If you have reliable and powerful builds that are also fun, that don't need a ridiculous number of buffs, Ice Spear definitely falls into that category. Some of the top ones like Lion's Claw is that too. Obviously, there's some really great ones in there. Seppuku is just incredible, the amount of damage you can get. But Ice Spear for me is number one. Let's jump into equipment. For the magic version, we have the Guardian Sword Spear in Magic Affinity, any staff for Terra Magica, any Steelwork Spellblade set, Ritual Sword Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Shield Talisman, Magic Scorpion Charm, Magic Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. Difference here in stats, we have 20 Dexterity and 50 Intelligence, so you can run some spells if you want to as well. We have 23 Mind, 25 Endurance, 60 Vigor, 33 Faith with the Faith Tier, so we can use Golden Vow, Hellish Brewery, and Terra Magica to get a lot of damage out of Ice Spear. Thanks for watching this one. I hope everyone enjoyed my top 20 regular Ashes of War with overpowered builds. Be sure to comment if there's something you want to see turned into a build. There's going to be some I'm going to show on here, by the way, that are just outside the top 20 for me, and that is Phantom Slash. Chilling Mist is great, although it's not really that damaging by itself. Thunderbolt, Stamp, Upward Cut's another one that does a lot of posture damage. By the way, if you want to see the best build for each main game boss next, be sure to comment that. If you want to see anything else, just comment. Thanks for watching, and be sure to sub.